Paris wants defense autonomy from Washington. During his annual foreign policy speech, French President Emmanuel Macron called on Europe to have its own financial and defense independence. He said, Europe can no longer rely solely on the United States for its security. We must guarantee our own security and sovereignty. To France's young president, the aggressive US stance against multilateralism and its extra-territorial moves against Europe should be enough reasons for the continent to galvanize into action and build its autonomy.
Well, I think that the EU and a lot of the rest of the world is starting to come to the conclusion that the United States is not a reliable partner, either militarily or economically. And you see a lot of the world, including the EU, going its own way in the belief that the US cannot be counted on.
Macron said discussions on defense cooperation should be extended to all EU states, including Russia, which entail renewed dialogue on cybersecurity, chemical weapons, conventional weaponry, territorial conflicts, space security and the protection of polar zones. Since his election in May 2017, the French president has frequently called for a more integrated Europe with a shared defense budget and common defense policy. Many experts believe Macron's remarks to have a European army is in fact an attempt to counter Donald Trump's military spending demands. Earlier this summer, the US president threatened to pull out of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, over the money issue. Macron's remarks were echoing German Chancellor's calls for a more powerful EU against Trump's protectionism. Supporting the idea of a joint European defense force, she said on Sunday, "With this, we will already develop more European unity." The EU seems to be seeking to change the architecture of its defense and trade systems, especially at a time when its ally on the other side of the Atlantic is out of tune. The Iran nuclear deal is a case in point.
I believe the EU does want an independent foreign policy, and one great example of that is with Iran. The EU made clear it did not want the US to back out of the Iran nuclear deal. EU has not wanted to back out of it, and yet it fears it's going to be sanctioned by the United States if it does not abide by the sanctions the U.S. is imposing against Iran. So I think this is a very good case, a very good example of where the EU wants to go its own independent path.
While EU powers like France and Germany are talking about security independence, it is not clear if they can convince the rest of Europe to follow suit. Experts believe that a European army would seriously endanger the future of NATO. That's why all European members of NATO, except for Britain and France, have been under the American nuclear umbrella since World War II.
Well, I mean, I guess I'd be surprised if NATO fell apart, but I think it's very possible that that will happen. I certainly think it should happen. I think NATO really doesn't have a legitimate role in the world, especially post-collapse of the Soviet Union. And certainly the U.S. has made it clear that it has less of a commitment to NATO. So I think the EU's gotten the signal that maybe it should be less committed as well.
Trump's America First policy has been a wake-up call for the EU to have its own roadmap, and signs of this are already emerging as European officials voice their plans to gain more autonomy from Washington.